Mr. Keyan.
Mr. Greg Coleridge, how you doing?
How goes it today here?
Going quite well. Glad to be here on another exciting Friday of making sense with Move to Amend.
Always a challenge, isn't it, to make sense of what's going on out there?
True story. And there's a lot going on right now to really just kind of parse through and make sense of. And we've got quite a few of those convergences with the nature of corporate rule and the power that they wield to dominate every aspect of our lives. And our job here on this show is to make sense and connect the dots between how these current events may seem disconnected, but are actually directly intersect with a lot of what we do here in the movement for democracy and accountability for corporate power.
Yeah, all these issues are so intertwined, interconnected. So anyway, I'm Greg Coleridge, Outreach Director here in Northeast Ohio. Keyan, where are you and who are you?
My name is Keyan Bliss, and I am the Grassroots Director calling in from Sacramento, California.
Vatican City have moved to Amend.
Yep. The Washington, D.C. of the West Coast, if you will.
True. That's true. Greetings, Marshall.
Hey there, Marshall. Welcome. But yeah, this is for those that are just joining us and are new to this program. This is the space where we're Moved to Amend. We are a national coalition of grassroots leaders and individuals working to amend the U.S. Constitution to make clear corporations are not people and money is not speech. And to do that, we are building a grassroots democracy movement that centers the dismantling of systems of oppression and seeks to inform how corporate power has directly contributed and created these systems in order to maintain and sustain their own power at this great expense of everybody else. So today we are here to talk about a few things that we have that have been going on in the past week related to corporate rule that has caught our attention and yours as well.
All right. Just want to acknowledge before we get going, Alfonso Saldana behind the scenes, who just keeps us here and visible and gets this program on the air and directs some salient comments our way as well, monitoring the chat when we don't do that very well. So thanks so much, Alfonso. And thanks to everyone who is tuning in this first Friday of April. So what do we got?
So the key piece of news that has been at the forefront of the mainstream news cycle is the trial that's happening in Minneapolis for the murderer of George Floyd, Derek Chauvin, former Minneapolis police officer, as well as his other three accomplices within that case. So as folks are running, this is the first week of trial, and there have been a number of witnesses, overwhelmingly testifying against Chauvin and the actions of the four police officers that are responsible for killing George Floyd last March in 2020. That kicked off a national uprising demanding police accountability and end to police terror in cities across the country, from Minneapolis to Los Angeles to New York City to Sacramento and beyond. There have been consistent protests, demonstrations, and actions in connection with this horrific murder that was live streamed to the world, and it is led not just in this country but across the world, even places like London, England, Berlin, Germany. Everybody that witnessed that video, it was incredibly traumatizing and hard to watch, and it just really harkens back to our long-standing history in this country of putting property rights above human rights, and particularly reminiscence for Black Americans of how we were once considered that property. And treated as disposable human beings, basically, if we were considered human at all. So we kind of connect the dots between why this trial and why police brutality in particular is directly connected to the nature of corporate power in the United States. Is we need to look, like, of course, as always, follow the money. And here in the United States, we typically spend around $100 billion on law enforcement every single year. And that typically, and over the last decade alone, that's been over $1 trillion. And, like the history, for those who aren't familiar with the history of policing, like we have not had an organized police force in the early days of the country. In fact, the modern police force arose during the mid to late 19th century when police after the passing of the Fugitive Slave Act that actually saw us create modern slave patrols. That was the first essence of law enforcement, an organized law enforcement organizations here in the United States. So from the early days of slave patrols to the modern era of broken windows policing, the history of policing in the United States starts and ends with protecting property, private property in particular. In fact, the Supreme Court has basically said as much. While many of us still consider the U.S. police to be peace officers here to protect and serve the safety and well-being of we the people, the court has held since as far back as 1989 in a little-known case called Deshani versus Winnebago County Department of Social Services that police and other government workers have no constitutional duty to protect us from the physical violence or harm from another person, including themselves. In fact, Chief Justice William Rehnquist at the time stated, "Nothing in the language of the Due Process Clause itself requires the state to protect the life, liberty, or property of its citizens against invasion by private actors, even where such aid may be necessary to secure life, liberty, or property interests of which the government itself may not deprive the individual without due process of law." So while they have made this abundantly clear in so many different ways, and why a lot of the protests that have arisen, have seen many blanket statements basically equating the destruction of property that has happened in cities across the country in the uprisings last year with the physical violence perpetrated against our bodies by police, as well as white vigilantes throughout our country, such as the brutal murder of Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia. This is just a long-standing pattern of police having more power than the people that they are supposed to be tasked with serving, at least on paper and whatnot. And the court has basically given them carte blanche to do anything and everything in service to primarily property owners. There are a long history of Supreme Court cases that have established everything from the doctrine of qualified immunity, which protects law enforcement officials from civil lawsuits and financial liability in cases where they acted in good faith in unclear legal situations, to cases where police can use deadly force if it is considered objectively reasonable. And meaning that they can even use that force for anything as minor or petty as as fleeing a traffic stop for a speeding ticket. So it's real. I mean, in a number of states across the country, including here where I live in California, there are several actual bills of rights that are exclusive for police officers. Basically, they're called Peace Officers' Bill of Rights, which establish an entirely set of special rights that police officers have that make it almost impossible to hold them accountable for the murders that they commit, which in the U.S., police officers are responsible for killing up to and over 1,000 people almost every year. So we see this here constantly, and this isn't by design, and Greg, feel free to chime in. One of the things I want to share is that, following the murder of George Floyd, it's been brought more, closer to attention just how powerful law enforcement associations and their unions are, which are also relatively recent in the history of the organized labor movement, in how influential they are with our elected offices. In fact, according to The Guardian last year, over 80 in local and state political spending, police officers, associations, and unions spent upwards of $87 million in just the last 2 decades. That includes over $64 million in Los Angeles, $19 million in New York City, and $3.5 million in Chicago. And most of that spending occurring in the last 10 years alone.
Just amazing. And, we need to be mindful of the fact that if this society has been built upon the sense of property being the most important item worth defending, that we need to understand that from the start, the courts have been an arm of that defense, particularly the higher you go up or lower, depending on how you want to look at like the Supreme Court. But also law enforcement is an arm of protecting property, whether that's local police or National Guard or Army, Navy, Air Force, FBI, CIA, NSA, you name it. Those institutions have been there to sort of protect, business, our quote unquote interests, whether those interests are domestic or abroad, that, again, kind of preempt human rights over that of property rights, corporate rights. So this is pretty consistent, longstanding, though certainly this trial, and because of things like this, we're able now to document that which we have not been able to confirm, but which people for years, if not generations, have said, particularly people of color and low-income people, that they have been abused and misused by law enforcement. Now we're finally being able to blatantly confirm that. And certainly George Floyd incident may be about the most horrific, certainly not the only. And so to see a modicum of justice, which hopefully will occur, is a good sign, and hopefully will serve. And that, we always like to say this, we hope is transformative, is something that really will be the tipping point. Time will tell, but it certainly does seem like that case was. And but nothing happens on its own. It's up to us to keep that momentum going, because again, it's just, this is not a spectator sport of trying to work for justice in any of its forms. We have to do it. And so we just can't rely on the memory or that video, but just have to use that in conjunction with our ongoing attention, understanding, and engagement individually, but with others.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, Greg. And, there has been good momentum that's been building in the wake of this case and other brutal losses of life for the Black community and other communities of color. Most recently, the tide has been shifting since that case of actually ending the doctrine of qualified immunity at the federal and local level as well. In fact, New York City recently introduced a pair of reforms that didn't quite ban qualified immunity, but at least made it significantly difficult for New York City Police Department to claim that within their conduct. And there's also been a number of initiatives and at the local level, including here in Sacramento County and city, that are working to create alternatives to 911 so that rather than having an armed police officer show up to address a mental health crisis call or non-law enforcement action, there will actually be mental health counselors and peer specialists that can actually respond to those conversations.
Right.
So, yeah.
Can you say something about police brutality bonds? Because that's sort of a link between, what's going on the streets and the abuse of people of color and profit by big financial institutions.
That's a good point, and I'm blanking a bit on the details of it, but I know that you're well informed of it. But basically, from my understanding, is a lot of the times when police commit these atrocities, they depend upon basically corporate insurance policies to like bail them out is basically what this is. And like a lot of that is paid for by bonds from from local governments, city police, county police, right?
Yeah, just like municipalities, sometimes when they want to do some huge project, they don't have money to do it. So they go out on the bond market and seek investors, just like you'd have a corporate bond, right? Well, this is a municipal bond, but instead of to redo the sewers, it's, oh my God, we've got, $25 million we got to pay out because of the brutality of our police department. So we're going to go out hat in hand. And Wall Street loves these things. And so City of Chicago alone, because of their inordinate amount of police brutality, have something like they're sitting on $100 million, I think, of police brutality bonds. And, that is not just the principal that they have to pay back, but of course, bonds come with them, like any loan, interest. And so who pays for not just the principal who pays back? It's the taxpayers of those communities. And so Wall Street is profiting from the brutality of what police departments are doing to their citizens and residents and others who may come into their community who are brutalized. But it's a profit-making undertaking, just as banks profited from using, back in the day, slaves as collateral from slave owners. So it's just, wherever people can make a buck, they're going to try to do it. And this is just sort of the latest manifestation.
Absolutely. And we can't, and we'd be remiss to not mention too how the defense industry makes millions of dollars off of giving its surplus military hardware to local law enforcement jurisdictions, and that are come at complete cost to the taxpayers here in Sacramento. In fact, during the pandemic last year, Sacramento City, where I'm based at, is paid $400,000 for a new Bearcat tank. In the midst of going on lockdown and people people suffering from not losing their jobs and not being able to conduct business on a regular basis. So it's crazy. It all feeds in.
Just one slight correction, Keyan. It's the war industry, not the defense industry. Remember, it used to be called the War Department. It used to be called the Secretary of War. It used to be called the War Budget. It was only, I think, into the Truman administration that PRIs, we need to change it to defense because it carries that whole connotation, which now, of course, is Homeland Security, which is even more sort of, euphemistically, seemingly important and easier to accept than what the purpose of those institutions and those people and those budgets was to wage war.
Right.
That was the intent, whether it was overseas or to native people or the like. But anyway, so that's what's going on. And, we'll see how long that trial goes. Something else that maybe some people saw, but maybe not, but sort of caught our attention is your friend and mine, Elon Musk, said on Twitter this past week or so that he is ready as of this next week. He just sort of teased it out that he was going to donate $20 million to a county near the Texas-Mexican border, Cameron County, where Brownsville is located, an additional $10 million to the city of Brownsville for downtown revitalization. Musk, as you know, is the CEO of Tesla and SpaceX, and he's going to release, more details this week. Well, of course, the mayor of that community of Brownsville was ecstatic because, this is a community that has been trying to, get back on its feet, but like so many communities around the country, due to deindustrialization, due to a variety of factors, have seen its economic health decline. And so they see this infusion of private corporate money as a potential boon. And in fact, accompanying that tweet, a couple of minutes, in fact, beforehand, he tweeted something else out. And that was an invitation to what he said were, quote, what did he say? Technicians, builders, essential support personnel, and engineers to come on down and set up what he called Starbase. So presumably He's talking about creating out of, the piece of land there, or part of the investment that he's going to put in, some special community that will be centered, a center of the new space development project that he's involved in. So, on the one hand, when you see something like this, how do we make sense of it? When you think about all of this money that's coming their way, on the one hand, at first glance, you think, well, that's great, right? Sort of a low, moderate income community getting this infusion of cash, maybe dollars coming in. But we need to be mindful of really what's going on here, that economic development really should be a public decision in large part. And if it's done with private interest, fine, it should be collaboratively, but the lead should always be from the public. And if there is going to be negotiations, it should be, as any negotiations, from a position of strength, from a position at least of equality, if not strength. But when you're an impoverished community, you're not negotiating from strength. You're negotiating from weakness, which means that other negotiator, that other person sitting on the other side of the table, is in a perfect position to try to take advantage of you and exploit you. And the more that these entities like Elon Musk and his Tesla and SpaceX, and just like Amazon, and just like Apple and all these other entities, that because of tax breaks and perks and low interest loans and all the other goodies that have gone their way, have become so powerful economically, they have been able to translate that economic wealth, that economic profit, into political leverage, to where now when they sit down and start negotiating, it's not sort of equal players. They can start to use their leverage to have conditions that are more their way. And something else just to sort of think about and be mindful of is that early on, corporations were not permitted to donate, to be involved in charitable activities. That was a no-no for two main reasons. One was for fear that the public, which created these entities to do, the public's business, to be subordinate to we the people, would never rise up to be powerful. And if they got into the business of being involved in charity, in giving out money, they might develop a sense of communities might develop a sense of dependency. And citizens and residents might feel, oh, they're pretty good. We should, become even more dependent on them. Well, dependency is the flip side of not being independent. And if you lose your independence, you lose power. And the other reason, of course, is why those who first developed these corporate charters, which were meant to be democratic instruments, that didn't want companies to become powerful and be involved in charitable purposes, was for the company stockholders. Company stockholders didn't want to see, in large part, their money going toward charitable purposes or even political campaign or political donations. They wanted to see the investment in whatever good or services was being produced. So it's something that, whereas we may feel today that, wow, that's pretty cool, that Elon Musk is going to be putting so many millions of dollars, or Microsoft is going to have, a new sports stadium named after them, high school stadium named after them, or whatever. It's very potentially dangerous because of the dependency that's created and the sort of good feeling that is engendered by these companies coming to the rescue. The companies that are using funds that they use their political power to make sure that the public would give them $10 million so that they can turn around and give $1 million back to the community. And we think, oh, what a tremendous good corporate citizen they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if you're looking, if those of you watching at home are looking for any prime example of that, I mean, just look at the bidding war that went around municipalities to get Amazon's second headquarters stationed within their cities. I mean, like, we literally saw with absolutely no guarantee that Amazon would follow through on its promises, local governments, municipalities, and state governors making deals with one of the most wealthiest corporations on the planet, and everything from like worth of hundreds of millions of dollars worth in tax breaks, special development projects, like taking people's land to make it beneficial for things like helicopter pads and stuff like that, redistricting their zones or whatnot, just to like basically beg this mega corporation to come to their properties. And it has also a chilling effect on our regulatory power, our power of oversight, where even just not just with a threat of a lawsuit, a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit from like a major corporation, but also the fear of losing out on that charitable giving, those charitable donations from their wealthy executives and owners to their money, that would make them think twice before even enacting the most popular of local ordinances to regulate corporate practices. And we saw that in Seattle most recently with the head tax that they tried to impose upon Amazon for its workers to get more money from it, right?
Right. Well, hey, before we go on, just want to acknowledge Karen and George on the call. Norm Conrad weighs in affirming the sense of we need not the War Department or even the Defense Department, but wouldn't it be nice if we had a legitimate, co-opted, truly authentic peace department and a Secretary of Peace? That's what, of course, Dennis Kucinich from my part of the world in Northeast Ohio was talking about. I wrote to him actually and tried to get him to introduce legislation to rename back the War Department, the Secretary of War and all that. He was, expressed curiosity in that, but he never did introduce legislation about it. I guess that was a little too much tongue in cheek, but anyway. All right. So what else you got, Keyan? Next issue.
Well,
makes sense enough here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, let's make sense of the issue of voting rights and what's going down in the state of Georgia. We saw a huge contentious election, one of the most consequential elections of the last decade, probably. Happened in Georgia, and now the backlash is coming from state legislators and in Georgia, where they are basically passed a series of draconian voter suppression bills that would basically make it harder for local Georgian voters to participate within the process, and it came within just last week, actually, in spite of a growing chorus of opposition from everyone from Georgia NAACP to the Coalition for People's Agenda, even to League of Women Voters and Common Cause have all come out against this awful measure that stands to disenfranchise hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Georgia voters. I mean, just to give a couple of quick tidbits of what this does, I mean, the 95-page bill would strip authority from the Secretary of State, making him a non-voting member of the state's election board, as it used to be. And it also allows for lawmakers to initiate takeovers of local election boards, which many critics rightfully say could allow for partisan appointees to slow down or block election certification, which we saw, our country literally come to the brink of insurrection to try and stop the certification of the 2020 elections. And it would also target heavily Democratic jurisdictions, many of which are in the Atlanta area and are home to the state's highest concentration of Black and brown voters. And, this cannot be seen as just a coincidence, and it's all really based upon this big lie, and that there was just massive voter fraud that ultimately cost Donald Trump the election, which of course is absurd, even by across the aisle by the Georgia Secretary of State, the Republican Party of Georgia, that has control over the state. The elected officials straight up said that this was one of the most secure elections they'd ever seen, and yet still somehow, some way, they have to appeal to their voters by passing this series of laws that make it basically easier for let's just say it outright, white voters to participate and challenge elected officials, candidates or whatnot, and and water down and dilute the votes of communities of color, particularly. So, this is just one in over 500 bills that have been introduced in cities and states across the country, trying to prevent the large-scale turnout that we saw. One of the largest turnouts we've seen since the early 1900s. In participation, thanks to voting by mail. It would make it harder for folks to qualify for voter by mail. It would make it. It would also require voter ID verifications, as well as eliminate no excuse absentee ballot voting. It is absolutely a full-out assault on voter suppression, and completely, as the Democratic Party establishment would say, has said, and what we would agree is, or at least I would agree, that this is expressly an anti-democratic legislation all across the country, and they're not the only ones that could pass such things. Texas State Senate just passed a similar bill that would end drive-through voting. That was instrumental, particularly in jurisdictions like Houston, Texas, which is a predominantly Black city that saw a huge turnout, and is threatening the state's Republican Party establishment that has a monopoly on the state legislature and the governor's office, and has been seeing many gains over the last few years to make to create a more purple state that's more representative of, and one that looks like and is more representative of its population.
Yeah. Keyan, what I found so timely and somewhat ironic, even a bit humorous if it wasn't so serious about the whole voting issue, is, in part, the GOP, again, not to be political or but the reality is that, the GOP realizes, at least the constellation of characters that make up the GOP at the moment, that because of political and demographic shifts, that it's not looking too good their way.
No.
The only way that, they can go one of two ways. Either they try to change and try to focus on policies that actually have widespread appeal, or they just suppress.
Mm-hmm.
And we can see what kind of sort of route and what choice they're taking. The other thing that I found so interesting is how people in Georgia and others have been, sort of a sign maybe of desperation, is that they're trying to appeal to major corporations,
right
down the Coca-Cola Corporation, Delta Airlines Corporation, and others, to try to weigh in and be the torchbearers of democracy, and weigh in against the unfair laws now. And, there was some tepid initial reaction by one or both of those main companies. There's some others.
Yeah.
Those are the two main ones that then were much stronger after the law passed. It's like, well, wait a second. If you guys, are going to weigh in and say, oh, this is unfair, and the like, why do you wait until afterwards when they've been debating this stuff? Before you have lobbyists on, you got to have lobbyists because you're getting perks from the state. So you know what's going on. Why do you wait until after the thing is already law before you then come out and be, upset about it? And of course, there's been backsliding, and then there's been, Georgia officials are saying, well, we're going to cut your taxes and the like. So it's been interesting. But the other thing that I think is interesting about it is that, looking at it sort of through the long view, is that obviously, corporate entities will use government in ways that suit them, right?
Yeah.
And when it doesn't suit them, then they will work against it. But quite honestly, when it comes to voting rights, elections really are not as important to them, maybe, as we think they are, because ultimately, whether there are people that they don't like who get elected, and whether those people that they don't like who get elected end up passing laws or regulations that they don't like. I mean, certainly they want those things to happen that they do like, but even if they don't, they always have as a backstop the courts, the judiciary. That's sort of the shield that they can always run behind, that's safe, that will protect them. that if any law or regulation is passed by all these crazies that want real democracy, well, then they can claim that any number of things is unconstitutional. And given the constellation of people on the Supreme Court right now, man, you got to think that's a pretty good bet. So, okay,
Right.
they'll try for purposes of PR because they don't want to alienate customers. But on the other hand, they're not going to go to the floor, to the mat, so to speak,
No.
because they've got this backstop of support. It's called it's called constitutional amendments that they have hijacked, and it's called courts that have invented out of thin air constitutional rights for corporations.
Yeah, I mean, let's be real. Like, this isn't like they're picking and choosing. Like, it's not like they are wed to any one political party. They, in fact, major corporations like Coca-Cola and Delta Airlines that are like the biggest, one among the biggest corporations in the state of Georgia. Like, they give to both parties just as much, and we'll split. They may give a little bit more to one party a couple of years when they're in power, but then they'll immediately switch that amount to the other side while still giving to both sides.
Right. Yeah, pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So what else? This week, is it this week? I think within the past week or so, an appeals court threw out a contempt charge against a lawyer named Danziger. He is a man. What's his first name? Stephen.
Stephen, yes.
Stephen Danziger. And this was there's an article in Intercept about it, interview of Danziger from his home on Democracy Now! He has been waging for literally decades, not by himself, but with a few others and on behalf of literally tens of thousands of Amazonian indigenous people in Ecuador and I think elsewhere, trying to protect the Amazon from plunder by what was at first Texaco Corporation that got taken over by Chevron. And the Chevron Corporation, at first Texaco, now Chevron Texaco, destroyed upwards of 1,700 square miles. Think about that. 1,700 square miles of land in the Ecuadorian Amazon. And a suit was filed, environmental lawsuit, which is pretty hard to win anywhere against a corporation in New York. And Chevron worked to relocate that, thinking they would do a lot better if they switched it to Ecuador, to the Ecuadorian court. So it went to the Ecuadorian courts, and the Ecuadorian court ruled after a lot of back and forth and the like that Chevron was guilty for destroying rainforest and fined them $18 billion in damages to try to, help the people and try to replenish and, to the extent they could, the rainforest. They lost a lawsuit before the Ecuadorian Supreme Court. It was appealed, and that appeal of 18 billion was dropped to, I think, 9.5 billion. But that's not the end of the story. The end of the story isn't even that they chose not to pay it, or that they sought to, just kind of poo-poo it and thumb their nose at it. No, they sought to take revenge and sought to make an example out of this attorney in such a way that would be so intimidating and so chilling, and as well as try to make sure they didn't have to pay a penny, but to also make sure that nobody would even think about trying to do something like this ever again. And so they went to incredible lengths. And this has been going on for quite some time, for years, to go after this guy in such a way. And they spent inordinate amounts of money, hired dozens of law firms, had private investigators that sought to smear and destroy the career and prevent Danziger from earning a living and even being forced to be in his home, to influence judges, to try to pervert and bribe, which they did successfully, an Ecuadorian judge who they paid, Chevron Corporation, and paid his family to move to the U.S. And this judge here in the U.S. with a straight face said, no, there's no conflict of interest, and used the testimony of that paid for judge as the main testimony to basically claim, an incredibly unprecedented legal action, sort of a unitary action going outside of the normal legal bounds to claim criminal intent against Danziger, to where this guy has just basically been ruined. I think they're hoping he would commit suicide. And so it's just an incredible story, incredible. And so the mere fact that this guy has not stopped, is continuing to speak out, is certainly a testimony to this single person who has persevered and is, like Don Quixote almost, but also has this commitment to the people that he was representing and to nature itself, which is just extraordinary. But on top of it, I think making sense of it all, in my mind, speaks to three other things. That how Chevron has used the courts, misused the courts, sort of influenced the courts to attack this person in a variety of ways, both here and overseas. Second, how they've used their vast resources, that they've gained economically through, in part, plundering the Ecuadorian rainforest to just use for these nefarious, fundamentally and profoundly, not only anti-democratic, but anti-humane and anti-just and certainly anti-natural world ways. And lastly, the power that corporations have, certainly not the first time, but it's even what Adam Smith warned. Adam Smith, we always think, the great sort of free marketeer wrote The Wealth of Nations. But Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations said, yeah, corporations fine, private business is fine, so long as it's rooted in community, so long as it can't move. The moment that capital has the ability to move, now you have an unhealthy relationship because they've got power, right? You can start playing off communities against communities, states against states, nations against nations. And so the ability to, like chameleons, in which one day a corporation is waving the US flag and the next day a Bolivian flag, the next day a Panamanian flag, where it's convenient for taxes, for liability, wherever. And so their ability to having been able to shift the decision, of where this case was going to be argued from one country to another, and their decision then, once the Ecuadorian court went against them, to just move out all their assets from Ecuador. And by doing that, okay, they're guilty, but how are you going to collect when they don't have a nickel's worth of asset inside their country? The ability of capital to be mobile is fundamentally and profoundly anti-democratic, that even Adam Smith spoke out against and issued a warning about. And so, this is a problem that remains with us today and that we've got to get a handle on, and that is a part of what corporate constitutional rights has allowed private capital to do. Right.
I mean, the case that you're describing is like really just kind of as you're saying, like just a textbook example of like the overwhelming power that corporations and their capital are capable of using to influence and control the legal system. And like one of the things that really stood out and shocked to me was how this multinational fossil fuel corporation was able to manipulate laws intended to break up criminal monopolies and like organized crime organizations. That like they use the RICO Act, which for those who aren't familiar with RICO is the racketeering. Sorry, hold on a second. It's the Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act or suit that they used. And like when
it's against organized crime, that's what it's meant to be. Yeah.
When they couldn't criminally charge him with bribery because the case was just fell apart in a criminal court, they moved the suit to a civil court, which they didn't have it which even if they couldn't put him in jail, could just continue to use that case against him and and keep him confined, and was entirely based upon one key witness, the judge that ultimately ruled against him. It's just goes, and it blows my mind, like how a court allowed this sort of thing. And not only did they allow that sort of thing, but they like appointed even when the Southern District of New York refused to actually take action against Donziger, the judge appointed a private firm, an unprecedented move, a private legal firm to actually continue the case against him.
Unprecedented. Norm in the comments says he was the lawyer representing indigenous tribes in Ecuador against Texaco Chevron, right? And reminds us of the Matt Damon movie about the ruination of a lawyer representing people against a corporation during the Prohibition era. I can't remember what that film is, but maybe somebody knows. Yep. So anyway, this is just an example, certainly an egregious example of a corporation running amok. Just horrific. So it's so good. And I know that Chris Hedges has given this guy in this case some attention, and the more light that can be shed on it. And it's good that, that this lawsuit or this court action has gone his way, and that might result in him no longer being under house arrest, which would be a step in the right direction. We'll see where it goes.
Right. Speaking of other blatant corporate abuses and attempts to thwart the will of the people, we also turn to Alabama, where Amazon workers are just recently held, actually, their warehouse workers just held a seismic union election. That
we go from one Amazon to another.
Straight up, right? Like from one.
How about that?
Can't make this up, folks.
Can't make this up. Good bridge. Good bridge.
Right? Like, I mean, this is another example of where just as organized labor comes close to another victory, comes close to a real victory against one of the most powerful corporations on the earth. It actually has their CEO and their executives running scared a bit and are actively fighting them. In fact, it was just recently revealed that CEO Jeff Bezos was the driving force behind a recent effort by company representatives at Amazon to stave off progressive critiques of the corporation's well-documented maltreatment of employees. And that includes, taking to social media and publicly criticizing and just being absolutely petty with anybody and everybody that would speak out against Amazon's use of what is basically modern slave labor. And also criticizing anybody that would be supportive of the organized labor efforts to actually unionize labor, like Amazon warehouse workers, and one of the first unions to be working under Amazon, right? So yeah, it really is showcasing just the overwhelming power that corporations have, not just to impact our First Amendment rights by drowning out our voices in elections, but also even to thwart and prevent our freedom of association, to organize under under the same banner and demand and collectively bargain on behalf of fellow workers for basic rights and privileges, that we deserve, that we have long and just basic protections for our wages and our safety. And of course, Amazon has done everything and anything that it could to do that, including just being absolutely petty on social media.
Yeah, he's getting all upset about the charges that workers are having to pee in water bottles because it's bad on his publicity. I guess he feels like it's sort of peeing on their publicity as a big corporate citizen. But time will tell. We'll see how this vote transpires. It's any time now, supposedly, when that vote should come out. So hope for the best. But some people have done some tremendous work down there, and if there is a victory, it's going to be a springboard for service workers in general and those at Amazon in particular, elsewhere around the country. And the fact is being done in the South just has, and in a place like, Alabama, of all places, that much more, I think, inspiration to show under such incredible odds. So
Right.
pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
All right, what else? Well, if it's a new day, it must mean that there's a new shooting. And I think there was actually a new shooting, wasn't there today?
Just
In Orange
yesterday,
County?
actually, that was in
Was it?
Orange, California.
Yep.
Someone locked down a office park in a city in California and killed, I believe it was 5 people, and left himself critically wounded. Another
it's
the
just
third shooting in 2 weeks.
Yeah, but it's just, now that the pandemic is starting to be controlled somewhat, there had not been as many mass shootings, sort of a perverted positive attribute of the coronavirus. But now that people are coming back out, so are people who are committing mass assaults.
Mm-hmm.
And sadly, it has to have something to do with the access to guns. And so there was a story, really, the last, well, can't even say last mass, but certainly one that we wanted to lift up was the mass shooting in Boulder on March 22nd. And the reason for it is that the timing of it occurred less than 2 weeks after a state judge overturned the city's ban on assault weapons and magazines that hold more than 10 bullets. This is something many communities have tried to do, passing local ordinances, trying to limit, not even prohibit, just sort of limit certain regulations regarding guns that are overturned at the state, get preempted at the state level or get challenged in court. But among the more grotesque, just the horrible sense of the tragedy of the people who were killed was just the sickening reaction by the NRA that bragged about the judge and celebrated the decision. Something to celebrate, they said, when he ruled that the local restrictions conflicted with state law and struck them down. I think if we, try to make sense of all of this, on the one hand, you just can't make sense of it. It just defies, I think, human decency and the like. But if we have to, beyond just the insensitivity and callousness and inhumanity of it, is that there's a couple things, takeaways of it. One is the ongoing power of the NRA through their federal campaign lobbying and contributions, and their success at convincing through ALEC and the like, that when communities, I know I live in Northeast Ohio, Cleveland, which has had its share of mass shootings, tried a number of years ago to pass something. It was just a really tepid effort at gun control. It got preempted at the state level, and you see that kind of preemption going on, and that's in part due to the power of NRA. Another is that ultimately, while those local rules are good, the problem is that guns can come from elsewhere. So ultimately, the solution's got to be federal, not even statewide, because so what if your city is on the border of a state and your state has strict gun laws, but the state next to you doesn't? Somebody can very easily bring in a gun easily that wasn't background checked or, is an AK-47 or AK-15, whatever. So, we can try to piecemeal, and there's something to be said for that. That would help a bit, but ultimately that's not the solution. It's federal. But the problem is federally, again, you're dealing with these entities that, like the NRA, that claim, because of corporate constitutional rights, they have the political right, First Amendment free speech. And if you try to go after them and try, as the state of New York did, as they did a number of years ago, to dissolve tobacco front groups. And I think even the Trump organization, state of New York, tried to remove their charter and sought to dissolve the Trump organization for illicit activity. State of New York, a number of months ago, tried to, and they did, file suit against the NRA for just disappearance of millions of dollars and wanted an investigation. So what did NRA do? They're seeking to remove that case from the state of New York to Texas by claiming that they're going to shut down and recharter in Texas. So again, you're seeing the power of corporations to say that when the Democratic heat is too is too strong in one place, they'll just unilaterally get up and go somewhere else. And that kind of power and that kind of quote unquote right that they claim they should unilaterally have will continue forever and ever unless we collectively say no. Human rights and the rights to protect our own communities from unsafe, laws, including basically no gun laws, should be more important than the quote unquote rights of corporate entities, in this case, to do whatever the hell they want, the right to removal, and to have political campaign contributions.
It really just kind of blows the mind of like how much power this one lobby, this nonprofit, mind you, is a nonprofit organization of the National Rifle Association, has over both sides, both sides of the aisle within our political discourse, and there's no sense to it, sadly.
Yep.
And
we should skip down. I mean, we're already almost top of the hour.
Mm-hmm.
How about if we go to the good news part? We always try to have a good news section.
True story.
Should we do this?
Yeah, let's share the good news, shall we? So, on yesterday, April Fool's Day, a new study by Hunger Free America found that when low-income Americans received extra cash through the recent federal recovery bill, they shockingly spent it on food and rent instead of on yachts, vacations in St. Tropez, private helicopters, vintage champagne, private islands, and sterling silver balls of twine from Tiffany. And another shocking find was that when hungry people obtained more food, they were actually less hungry. Amazing of that, right?
So anyway, this was a tongue-in-cheek given April Fools that creatively Hunger Free America came up with that, defies, obviously, the fact that what is slam dunk obviousness, there are many people in our country that will fight, right, to the last sentence or to the last nickel or to the last minute against helping people when it is hurting their bottom line or protecting their own privilege. So in that same tongue-in-cheek spirit, we thought here at Move to Amend that we might embark on a couple of studies that we've already actually, have we not, Keyan, started. So maybe we can just go back and forth and share a couple of these studies that we're in the midst of being involved in. The first one is that we're in the midst of doing this study that says that the more money and tax breaks you give to the rich, the richer they are.
Wow, shocking, shocking study right there.
You're part of this one. You're doing the next one, right?
Oh yes, I am. In the midst of conducting studies on larger political donations from a smaller number of people decreases democracy, as they would find.
Who knew?
Who knew?
Yeah, we're hard at work doing this one as well. That pollutants released into the air, water, and land causes pollution.
Boy, you can't make this stuff up, y'all. This is wild, right? And another study we're missed of, more guns held by more people increases the risk of gun violence and accidents. Who would have thunk it?
Yeah, who would have thunk it? Or even this one. I mean, this is really shocking. Greater access to quality and affordable health care, not to mention comprehensive, improves human health.
Wow. Revelatory. We're really breaking new ground here. And let's not, of course, forget this this groundbreaking study, last but not least, increasing corporate constitutional rights decreases human rights. Heavens.
Yep. We are hard at work on these studies that we think breaking new ground and defying what people generally think is the given. So maybe on that note, we should sort of wrap up and get into announcements. Nothing particular that I'm aware of other than next week making sense, although maybe you can tease something that we will say, but on schedule anyway. The only thing formally on schedule is next week at the same time is making sense, Jessica Munger, and people get to put up with me again next week.
Hey, can't get enough of you, Greg. Definitely, you are on point. It's been great joining this show, hosting with you, and look forward to that next week. And also, for those of you following, keep an eye out on our social media pages and our website next week. We're looking to have some big news that will mean a lot to y'all, I'm sure, and that y'all have been waiting for. So just keep an eye out and stay tuned.
Is that big news or bigly news?
Bigly, I would say.
Bigly news. That would be bigly news. So,
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, what are some of the ways to get involved and support Move to Amend, Keyan?
Well, one of the ways that you can participate with us is by joining our 2021 campaign to move the 117th Congress to amend the Constitution. If you go to movetoamend.org/117 campaign, that's 117 or 117 campaign, you will find our list of targets, 135 congressional House representatives that we are seeking to get on board with the We the People amendment once it is reintroduced into Congress. We have already laid out all the materials and steps that you need to take in order to do that. So go to the webpage again, movetoamend.org/117 campaign, and find out all the materials you need to contact your House reps offices, schedule constituent meetings, and get the word out to encourage folks to phone bank, text bank, all the things to get our House representatives on board with this amendment.
You can also sign our petition, movetoamend.org/motion. That really helps us when we go and lobby, like for the 117th Congress to Amend campaign. The more people in a congressional district that we can wave in front of a congressperson, the more impact that has to say, well, I better get on this boat because there's all these potential voters coming my way. So it really does make a difference. Hey, You got to have power. Power comes either from organized money or organized people. We sure as heck don't have the one, so we sure as heck better have a lot of the other.
Absolutely. And you don't even need to just sign it online as well. You can also text to add your name to over 475,000 people who have signed this petition. If you text AMEND, that's AMEND, to 707-656-4019, you can add your name with the hundreds of thousands of other people and hundreds of organizations that have joined us in support of making clear corporations are not people and money is not speech.
And that's just scrolling down at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
What else can people do?
You can also help to continue your ongoing political education work by checking out our movement education program. If you go to movetoamend.org/education, you can sign up for this completely self-driven course, like taking us, examining the direct impacts of corporate rule, as well as the history of past people's-led movements, as well as to bolster and enhance your analysis on the systems of oppression that corporate rule depends upon in order to maintain its status on power and control over our communities. So again, go to movetoamend.org/education and sign up. And you can get, and if you want, you can even get help from those of us on the Move to Amend team once you get through the full way. And it doesn't matter if you're part of Move to Amend either. You can be, no matter what organization you're with, this is valuable historical knowledge and organizing analysis that you can add to your own repertoire.
Well, and lastly, you can help us out financially. We make do and make every dollar go a very long way. We hold on to them and stretch them. I mean, they are like rubber. We stretch them so much. But it does, like any organization, it does take a minimal amount of resources to function. And so with your help, we can do hopefully more than that. So please do consider helping us out. Go to movetoamend.org/donate. The truth of the matter is we're intentionally, that political education part goes, and political independence part goes hand in hand with being economically independent.
Mm-hmm.
And consciously, deliberately that way, we don't get funds from big corporations, big foundations, political parties, government, millionaires, billionaires. Elon Musk, he's not giving us the $10 million or to like even $10. So anyway, we rely on people at the grassroots, like people like you. And if you are about to receive or have received that stimulus check from the American Rescue Plan and you don't need any of it or all of it, please consider sending it our way. Or even this Sunday, if you find a little bit of extra cash in that Easter basket of yours, please consider sending that our way. So thank you so much for all your support in the past and hopefully continuing in the present and future.
Mm-hmm. Any amount helps, and we always appreciate any and all support that we get from our supporters at home that are watching this and volunteering with us in affiliates and advocate groups across the country. So thank you so much again for tuning in to this lovely edition of Making Sense.
Thanks to Alfonso for helping us out and keeping us honest and scrolling pertinent comments and links and the like. Thanks. Mm-hmm. And thanks to all of you.
Thanks, y'all. We'll see you next week.